Great film composers all understand the importance of studying a film story before writing a single piece of music. Howard Shore is famous for having spent nearly a year studying the Lord of the Rings trilogy before writing any of the music for the first movie. In this video, we are going to follow his example by learning how studying the characters, worlds, and moral arguments of your stories can help make your own music sound much more personal for the projects you're working on. Welcome back to another video. As with the other videos in this series, I am going to be working with The Foundling, which is the official short film for this year's Zurich International Film Music Competition. Last week, we created and studied a scene list for this film, which helped reveal that I'm going to need to create at least 2 sound palettes, about 3 different themes, and possibly pick 2 instruments to represent specific characters. Now, I could call it there and just start writing music right away. However, I want to go a step further to help make sure that my music really does sound like a natural extension of the story itself. And for that, there are 3 core elements of the story I can look at: the characters, the story worlds, and the moral arguments. So let's get started by looking at the characters. First, I'm going to make a list of every character in the film in the order that they appear. Of these characters, I want to know which ones are the most important, and what roles they play in the story. This is important because the major characters of a story are often a crucial source of inspiration for the themes and motifs of a film's soundtrack. Now, for a short film like this one, there aren't likely to be that many different characters, so I just want to focus on figuring out who the protagonist and antagonist are. And to me, there are only really 2 characters at the center of the story, and they are the Unicorn Boy and his mother. Now, this may seem counterintuitive, but the mother is our protagonist, while Unicorn Boy is actually the antagonist. You see, the mother's actions and decisions are what propel the story forward. She's the one that starts the story by abandoning Unicorn Boy. She then sets up the main conflict by trying to see him again years later. She then ignites the conflict by running away when he recognizes her, and then shapes the ending when she abandons him yet again. In contrast, the only decision that Unicorn Boy really contributes to the plot is to chase after his mother once he recognizes her. Now, these actions are important to notice, but in order to really capture these characters in the music, I need to study them a little bit further. I want to discover the reasons why they behave and act the way that they do. In other words, I need to identify their psychological and moral weaknesses and their desires or goals. The psychological weakness of a character is a belief or desire that they have that ends up harming them or keeping them from being happy. For the mother character, this is her need to be normal. She needs to be just like everyone else, and this manifests itself in many ways throughout the story, but most chiefly as her own moral weakness. The moral weakness of a character is a belief that they have, or a way that they act, that ends up hurting people around them. In this case, the mother's inability to stand out from the crowd is what leads her to abandon her child at the circus. We have evidence that this was her motivation, because she doesn't run away to the circus with her child. She abandons him, and then attempts to continue her normal life without him. Both her moral and psychological weakness help reveal what her desire is. And a character's desire is just their goal for the story. It's the reason why they act the way they do, and the context behind every decision that they make. Here, the mother's desire is to just live a happy, normal life. This might seem a little generic, and that's because it is. At the end of the day, her character is actually quite simple in this aspect. She just wants a happy, normal life. But this desire is what fuels all of her decisions, and is at the core of our conflict throughout the story. If we turn our eyes to Unicorn Boy, we find it a little more difficult to answer these questions, which is actually another reason why he's not our protagonist. But with a little thinking, we can describe his character like this. Psychological weakness. His desire to know more about his mother causes him some distress. Moral weakness. His desire to know more about his mother causes trouble for her, as he decides to chase after her. And desire. Like his mother, Unicorn Boy just desires to live a happy life. However, unlike his mother, we see hints throughout the story that he has actually accomplished this. Now, all of this information helps me to understand the story a little bit better. But before I start making decisions on what kind of themes, sound palettes, or motifs I want to start writing, I need to check out my other two story elements first. Studying our story world is important because the various subworlds of a story often provide insight and inspiration to what kind of instruments and styles of music you want to work with in the soundtrack. The trick to this is to identify what areas the characters visit throughout the film, and what impact each area has on the story. Now, for this film, I counted 3 main subworlds. The larger world of the entire circus, where we see games, rides, exciting exhibits, and just laughing people left and right. Then there's the smaller areas that we visit inside the various tents of the circus, where things start to feel a little more subdued and more real. Finally, there's the outside world, or the local town, which we never actually see, but we definitely notice through the many different locals who are visiting the circus. Now, each of these subworlds are given differing degrees of focus throughout the film, but each of them have an important impact on the story. The larger world of the circus functions as the primary location for the story. It's seen at various moments of high energy throughout the film and provides a meeting ground for the other 2 subworlds. This is where they first collide, and it seems to emphasize a kind of unity between the 2 worlds in the many different ways that they interact with each other. However, inside of the circus tents, we find a much more intimate and human environment. These subworlds help remove some of the flashing lights and sounds of the circus, and instead focus on a more honest portrayal of how the 2 worlds interact, with neither of them truly accepting the other. Now, finally, the outside world, or the local town, is the most exclusive. We never see this world in person. The circus members are allowed to set up camp nearby, but they don't venture away from their tents. Instead, the locals are the ones that must come and visit them. This world seems to be the biggest factor holding the mother back. She views her own son as a threat to her membership, and thus abandons him in order to remain a part of it. Now, we'll come back to this idea of subworlds in a moment, but for now, the last element of our story that we want to study is something called the moral argument. The moral argument is the overall lesson that the story teaches on how people should act, and every story has one to some extent or degree. This lesson, or moral, is revealed throughout the story in the different ways that characters are either rewarded or punished for their decisions and actions. And it's important to be aware of this moral argument because it provides a crucial lens for our music. How different characters abide by or clash with the moral argument of the story often colors the way that the music will be used and sound throughout the film. Now, to figure out how it's going to impact the music, we first need to understand what the moral argument is. And to do this, there are just a few questions that you can try answering. Number 1 is, what central moral problem must the protagonist confront throughout the story? 2 is, what key choice must the protagonist make at the end of the story? 3, how do each of the other major characters present a variation on approaching this central moral problem? And 4, what is the overarching theme that the story is about? Now, for us, these answers are actually quite simple and straightforward. Throughout the story, the mother has to confront the decision she made to abandon her child, and whether she will make amends for this now that several years have passed. Ultimately, her central moral problem is about choosing a life with her son or a life of fitting in with her local world. In other words, does she pursue happiness through fitting in or embracing her life as it is? The final choice she makes is to choose her normal life of fitting in over her own son. She apologizes, but ultimately abandons him all over again. Unicorn Boy is the only other major character in this story, and we see him present a variation on this moral problem by choosing the other option. Rather than trying to fit in with the outside world, he accepts who he is and finds happiness in the life that he has built. With each of these 3 questions answered, we can find out that the overarching theme of this story is about finding happiness through self-acceptance rather than the acceptance of others. In this story, we watch as the mother refuses to embrace her life as it is, and instead struggles with trying to fit in. As a consequence, happiness seems to elude her. On the other hand, her son accepts himself for who he is, and in nearly every way seems to find the exact kind of happiness that she has been looking for. Now, each of these story elements, the characters, the subworlds, and the moral arguments, are all up to interpretation to various degrees, and you may very well have different takeaways from this story than I do, and that's fine. However, regardless, I do recommend taking the time to sit down and study these three aspects more diligently, because the next step is to take our notes and figure out exactly what music we need to write for this film. To do this, you can simply answer a couple questions about each of these core elements. For the characters, which characters, important weaknesses or needs, or desires need their own musical theme, sound palette, or motif? For the story worlds, what geographic areas or moments in time need their own theme, sound palettes, or motif? And finally, for the story's theme, which lessons, moral arguments, or key emotional experiences require their own theme, sound palette, or motif? Taking your time to answer each of these questions will help you define more clearly exactly what you need to accomplish with your music. For me, my original list of potential material expanded quite a bit. Now, after answering these questions, you'll want to review your notes and make one final list of every single theme, sound palette, and motif that you'll need to write for this film. And as part of your list, you can include notes on how each one will be used to support or tell the story, what specific scenes or kinds of situations they will need to appear in, and what other themes, sound palettes, or motifs they will be closely related to. The more time you spend studying these core elements and planning out your themes, the more successful your music is going to be at forming an integral part of the film. Now, creating this list was the last step before actually writing music. So starting next week, I'm going to take you through my process of sketching out harmonies and melodies for each of these main themes. For now, if you are interested in what my own finalized list of musical material looks like, I'll include it as a link in the description of this video. I'm not going to cover it here because if I were to try, this video would easily double or triple in length. So with that, we have reached the ending of another video. I want to take a quick moment to thank my incredible patrons for making videos like this one possible. This week, a special shout out goes to my newest patron, Frank. I'm glad to have you on the team, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you better over the coming weeks. If you would like to show your support for this channel, there are links to private lessons, purchasing a copy of my book, and my Patreon page, all in the description of this video. So until next time, keep studying, keep working hard, and keep writing new music.